Welcome to the Sky Sports Rugby Union podcast special. You've just heard the familiar sound of Swing Low Sweet Chariot, but for how much longer will we hear it at England matches? Well, its association with the Red Rose is under review. The American spiritual originates from the slave trade in the United States. On Tuesday of this week, England Rugby announced a diversity and inclusion group, with the RFU recognising there's a long way to go to truly reflect society across the whole organisation and the wider rugby community. On Thursday of this week, it was announced there'd be a review into the song, which has been sung in England matches for over 30 years. Well, the song has long been part of the culture of rugby and is sung by many who have absolutely no idea about its origins or its sensitivities. We're reviewing its historical context and our role in educating fans to make informed decisions. So, joining us to discuss the future of Swing Low are three former internationals, all of whom know what it's like to hear it ringing around Twickenham in support of England teams. Topsy Ojo played for England and London Irish over a 16-year career. He retired in 2019. Maggie Alphonsi won the World Cup with the Red Roses in 2014 and is now on the RFU's 55-person council. She has aspirations to one day be president of the RFU. And of course, British and Irish Lion Will Greenwood, who won the World Cup in 2003 with England and returned home on British Airways plane renamed Sweet Chariot. Welcome, one and all. I'll start with you, Maggie. How do you react to the fact that the RFU are having a review into the singing of Swing Low Sweet Chariot?
I think to start off with, I think it's good that the RFU are having a review. I don't agree with it being banned. Look, it's a song that I grew up singing myself. I didn't know anything about the history of it, and not until I was told did I stop singing the song. And my attitude to it has always been, it doesn't sit easy with me. But at the same time, I know people aren't singing it to offend. I know people aren't singing it because they're racist. I know that most people don't know the history behind it. So I think it's great that we're having these conversations and we're reviewing the history and the origin of most things now. You know, we're looking at the song, we're looking at statues and so on. But then I think it's important that people are empowered to make their own decisions. I don't think banning it will necessarily help people with regards to decisions that they make. I think just educate and let people go from there.
Okay, Topsy, Maggie says that people aren't singing it to offend, but once they know that it's a slave song and they have been educated, if they continue to sing it, are they offending?
Well, I think that's the discussion, and that's probably where we are now. I think Maggie's hit the nail on the head in terms of the education around it. I mean, I'm included in that. I didn't know its origins. If I was on the pitch now and people started singing it tomorrow, knowing where it's come from, would I feel comfortable? Probably not. And again, you're asking people to think about that and to make those decisions. No one's enforcing a ban. I think, because it's being reviewed now, I think a lot of people are shocked and saying, oh, they're going to ban it. That's not actually what's been said. The RFU are doing this review to make a real stance towards helping inequality and injustice, and this is part of it. So let's look at it with an open mind, open attitude. Let's talk to people, let's educate, and then we can make an informed decision. I think if you get to that point, then we're in a good place.
Will, are the RFU in a lose-lose situation here? Because if they try and ban it, as Maggie and Topsy have said, there'll be pushback. If they don't try and ban it, people will say, why are you letting Twickenham crowd sing a song about slavery?
Without sort of spinning that around the narrative into sort of win-win scenario, because the reality is no one's won over the past 200-300 years, especially in relation to the slave trade, of which the Colston statue was clearly something that had a huge pivotal role perhaps 2 weeks ago. I think it's an opportunity to educate, and I think it's that ability for perhaps on occasion clumsy earnestness, but not silence, and by that implicit. I know we had the great Michael Johnson on a podcast recently, and it was a real moment for me to sit and listen. It was the week after the brutal murder of George Floyd, Floyd. And he talked about, historically, he's always said, if people don't want to sing, but they didn't say sing, don't want to get involved in the debate, I understand that. If you don't know enough about it, then fine, sit this one out. He then went change, but that time is gone now. He absolutely passionately believes that you are complicit with silence. So what the RFU are doing, perhaps with years and years of silence, I rang my father before this. He coached England in the 80s. He took an England tour to South Africa in 1984. And Stuart Barnes didn't go, Rory Underwood didn't go. But at no stage as a coach did anyone ever consider to even ask the players. It was just left to themselves. So now what we're trying to do, far too late, is to open up the discussion that both Maggie and Topsy are talking about, to make sure, A, there are educated decisions being made about these topics, and there is a representation of voices that allows a discussion to take place that gets to a conclusion that you're never going to please everyone, but where people are comfortable. And perhaps comfortable is be a really poor choice of word when you consider what we're talking about.
Okay, well, all three of you have said the word educate. So let's look at the history of the song. Thought to have been composed by an American slave called Wallace Wallace with his wife Minerva in the mid-1800s. Now, Professor Josephine Wright, who's a professor of American Studies, Music and Literature at the University of Worcester in Ohio, says that the song symbolized and continues to symbolize freedom for Black Americans. It was used during slavery as an alerting song on the Underground Railway to get slaves out of problems so they could escape, and as a burial song signifying the release of the soul from human bondage. Now, the late Horace Clarence Boyer, a prominent scholar of African American music, says that it fits into a group of spirituals that say, I would rather die than be here. Lord, just come and take me right now. It can be interpreted that the chariot is coming forth to take the slaves home or to heaven. Okay, so people know now, let's say, okay, what they're saying is, life is so bad as a slave, I would rather die than be here. So Will Greenwood, our upper class, middle class Twickenham crowd, now they know that, should they still be singing the song?
So I think the best way to answer that is asking me personally, would I sing this song now, knowing what I know? And I wouldn't join in that song. Have I joined in it historically? There are unquestionable at times. I've also, although it's a side topic, the questionable gestures that go with it as well can be viewed as inappropriate, and especially with youngsters around. But that's to deviate from this hugely important point that the events of the last 3 weeks, you would suggest, well, why am I only now paying attention to it? Because it's, I don't know, has it been my naivety or ignorance? Have I grown up in an area of the north of England where it just never crossed my doorstep? But now it comes back to that implicit silence. And so my view on it is I want to educate myself as much as possible, learn as much about the topic as I possibly can. And in this instant, with the direct question there, perhaps the discussion will come to a conclusion for the group, the collective as Twickenham. But before that collective decision takes place, my personal viewpoint would be to not join in the singing of this song.
Okay, Topsy, what about you? You said before that you weren't aware of what it meant until recently. Now you are. Would you sing it at Twickenham in the crowd?
No, I wouldn't. Being perfectly honest, again, this last period has been quite a big awakening for me as well, and I've probably learnt more than I ever have in terms of history, Black history in particular. You start thinking of all incidences where, and I think my experiences have probably been mild compared to some others, but that's probably beside the point. I think it's got to a stage now where enough is enough, and we need to have these conversations. And this story has been in the press in bits and parts over the last couple of years, and it's come to a head now where it's now, okay, we're actively discussing it. We're having these uncomfortable conversations. And that's probably a big thing. It's something that's been sung at Twickenham for 20, 30 years, and people, I guess, don't want that disturbed, but we have to. This is the point. We're talking about something really powerful, and me, definitely, I wouldn't be singing it. I wouldn't take part in it.
Maggie, you said that you want to be the president of the RFU. So let's imagine that's happened, and you're at Twickenham watching the England side, and the crowd are singing "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot." How would you feel?
I would feel obviously disappointed by that. Again, if I was president, I would not encourage it being banned. I still stick by that. I would work really hard with the RFU to continue to have a communication piece about telling the story. And if anything, it would be about reframing the story. Again, I think it's more powerful to empower people than it is to stop them. And like Topsy's already highlighted with regards to what the RFU have said, the RFU are trying really hard to improve the diversity and inclusion. And I know that the discussions that are currently going on now, they would do anything to try and support it. So I think if I was president and this song was happening, I would work with the RFU to ensure that we find ways of communicating with our members and actually understanding why they sing it, and what would allow them to feel comfortable by not singing it.
Well, can I ask Maggie a quick question, just to understand that what I think this creates as an opportunity is to repurpose the discussion using perhaps this highly emotive subject, this song that Twickenham crowd have loved singing, into a wider narrative about the representation in the higher echelons of the game. I think on the field in the World Cup final, the representation was a good demographic of within the England squad. But when you look at the council that you're on, Maggie, it must feel again, excuse my claim, must feel a lonely place if you can't be what you can't see. And I just want to understand how it is for you going into those corridors of power, and perhaps, without putting words into your mouth, feeling very much a minority.
So what's quite interesting is when everyone talks about the England team, they all talk about the men's team. So the men's team have over 30% diversity in it, which is fantastic. But then if you look at the England women's team, there is one person from a BAME background there. And when I joined the England team, what might have been 15 years ago, we had a BAME captain. We had a mixed race captain, Paula George, and then after her, we had a black captain called Maxine Edwards. Almost it feels like in the women's game we've gone backwards. And for me to be the only BAME person on the council, one would say it's lonely, but actually I feel quite empowered. The council are very welcoming. At the same time, my job on the council is to ask those challenging questions, to make sure I have a conversation and actually work to get people on side. I don't want to be on the outside throwing stones in. I want to be on the inside trying to create that change. And I think what's great is that the RFU have made that statement that they are going to support diversity and inclusion. And things are now starting to move now, which is great. Where previously we might have that conversation and it might have been brushed under the carpet. When now I really feel there's this momentum shift that people want to be part of the change rather than be part of the problem.
Topsy, when I was playing rugby union, I played on the wing. It was kind of expected that you'd have a black guy on the wing. I wasn't thought for 1 second that I'd play further in. Do you feel that when you played, that was pretty much the same narrative, that if you were black, you were quick, but you weren't necessarily any good at anything else?
Again, it's probably something you just don't think about, but I would probably agree. I would say, you tend to be the fastest kid on the team. And they think, right, where do you go? You go on the wing, we'll get you the ball, you run as fast as you can and go and score a load of tries. That was kind of the narrative. And I guess, especially when you're young, getting into the game, as I was like a 10, 11-year-old, you're just happy to be involved and to be playing. And at that time, it doesn't really have any bearing. But I guess, if we're talking about now, the grand scheme of things and greater inclusion and why aren't there people involved in the higher echelons of the game, does that have an impact? And I think, listening to people talk in the week as well, coaches, Paul Hull, for example, that's probably been the case in terms of, how much extra development has been offered to these guys so that they're not just the winger in the team, they're actually a key part of the decision making. I mean, from my experience, I had a lot of, dealing in the team in senior positions, in decision making positions, but obviously my voice was from the wing. What changes do we need to make to actually get more of those guys in those 9, 10, 12 positions that maybe encourages them more to want to aspire to be coaches, to be directors of rugby, to be on boards, to be on councils. So that's part of the discussion, which, as Maggie's just said, hopefully the RFU are having now, because I think participation in the game as a whole is on decline.
So, Maggie, with that said, if the RFU wants to be truly inclusive, how can they have the song associated with them being a song about slavery?
I think it's an interesting question you asked there. Look, the RFU, if they went down that route and banned it, what will happen is you're just going to get so much resistance. I just know you will. We know the rugby community in the sense that the song is almost has been woven into the fabric of what rugby is. And like I said, there's a lot of people who will be mixed by this reaction about the Swing Low song. Some people will actually take the education on and go, that's fine, I'm now not going to sing it. Some will go, I've been singing it forever, don't be offended, stop being a snowflake, which I already have had many tweets and abusive messages already from lots of people about that. And then there's others who are going to go, thank you for allowing me to reflect on it, because I will now take this away and actually really honestly think about it. So it's really difficult. You said at the start with regards to the RFU being in a difficult position, they could not ban it and be seen as supporting it, and then they can ban it and then be seen as, you're trying to silence the people. So I think it's a difficult one. My opinion and my stance that it shouldn't be banned, but the RFU haven't said they're going to ban it. But I just feel like this is the discussion that we're going to have maybe in a week's time after review has happened.
Will, imagine you're in the stands at Twickenham. How do you imagine the Twickenham crowd, those people around you, would react to the fact that we're even talking about Swing Low Sweet Chariot?
Well, I would hope with a great deal of common sense and understanding about the new lens with which we are operating under, on the back of the tragic events that have taken place in the short term, but that can be analogued and indexed for centuries. I think it would be a particularly insensitive soul to do that. And the vast majority, we like to think, although we must never view that we are the perfect sport, we've had our issues down the years, that we will self-police. Part of the great strength of rugby is the self-policing that's done within teams. The topography of rugby teams celebrates difference and then has this ability to bring together. Without tying myself up in knots, I genuinely believe that the sensible situation would be to have this discussion, and if a decision was made, that I do believe that the Twickenham crowd would listen to the decision that's been made by a committee put together with hugely diverse opinions on the fact, and come to a conclusion that doesn't, and it goes back to a word Topsy used, doesn't, I think you used the word, that the last thing would be to offend or upset. And if you're doing that, then it's a song. We need to move on from it and find a different song.
Topsy, Stuart Barnes wrote an article for The Times, 10th of March 2017, and in it he said we shouldn't get puffed up with political correctness. Songs evolve, spirituals are no different. So will there be a time when, now we know what Swing Low Sweet Chariot is about, we sing it, but we can celebrate it?
Interesting. I mean, yeah, that's a tough one, potentially, but I think we've got a long way to go to get to that point, and maybe this is the starting point. in terms of, right, okay, let's have a real open and honest discussion about where this song has come from. Okay, and now for English rugby fans, and like we said, we know no one means offence by how they sing it, but it's a case of they don't actually know why they're singing it. So now they know, is it okay to take it and keep it in this direction, or do we need to almost respect the past and where it's come from and say, okay, is it right for us to still keep singing it? I mean, getting to a point where actually it is celebrated in terms of maybe this liberation from slavery, that might be brilliant, but that's not where the song originated from. It was about, like you've said, rather dying than being in captivity, which is really strong. So to kind of take the meaning and almost leave it behind and say, no, this is a rugby song now, this is what it means, I don't think that's good enough. I don't think we can do that.
Do you know, I've never understood why rugby fans sing it anyway. There's always been a bit of a disconnect for me. All sorts of debate about how it came to be sung in rugby stadiums. 1950s slave era spirituals had a reawakening because of the civil rights movement in the States. And in this country, Swing Low was sung in rugby clubs as a drinking song. And then we go up to 1987, talk of Martin Afire at the Middlesex Sevens, and that's why people were singing it. Then, of course, Chris Oatey scored that hat-trick for England against Ireland in 88. We've had people like Brian Moore saying it was sung way before 87 in the Middlesex Sevens. Does anybody actually know why a Twickenham crowd would sing Swing Low Sweet Chariot? Because I don't. Maggie?
So I have heard many reasons behind why it has been sung, and also when did it actually start. So I guess the main line of it is that it was sung because obviously there was a sole black player on the pitch who scored lots of tries. I've been told it's more associated with Chris Oatey, and there was a group of obviously white fans who started to sing the song in connection with the fact that it was a black rugby player, the only black player at the time. So that's what I have been told, and also feel like I've read a lot about it. But it's interesting to hear that there's different origins of where they feel when it started. Like Martin Afire said, he obviously said he heard it when he started playing in the Middlesex Sevens. So it's quite unclear a little bit, but based on the fact that it was sung because there was a black person who was playing on the pitch.
I'm glad
I think
you mentioned
again, just to go back. Sorry, Wedders, to interrupt, because Martin Afire is obviously one of the all-time great rugby players, league and union, and his nickname was Chariot. And so the implication was originally that they could sing it Swing Low Sweet Chariot because the great Martin Afire, and that is a hugely innocent reason for it to have begun. If that is then repurposed 2 or 3 years later when Chris Oatey plays and goes, there's another black winger scoring tries, they are all the same, black wingers, what is the difference? Let's sing that song. Then that is hugely distasteful. However, this again is slightly apocryphal, Wedders, and I don't actually know if that's factually correct. What may be difficult to discover are the origins. If it's not difficult to discover, and the RFU can reveal that as the source, then it takes on another complexity and becomes almost even more distasteful. But again, the facts need to be clarified before people take stances with positions without actually knowing where or why the Twickenham crowd sang it. And that's part of this education process.
I think
Topsy,
for me...
this is Go on, Maggie.
Sorry, I'd say I think for me it's more about regardless of probably when it started being sung isn't probably significant for me. I think it's the fact that where the song actually originates from, and it is about oppression, it's about slavery. That's what I think I'm not comfortable with. So whether it started with Martin or Oatey, for me isn't significant. It's just more about the fact of where the song actually originates from, which is probably what allows me to have my position and my stance.
Sure. Topsy, we've been talking about Martin Afire there. We spoke to him today, and he said he's proud that the song was sung at him, as the meaning behind it was invigorating and positive and not racist. But I'd put to you, how does he know that? How does he know people weren't singing it, sniggering, thinking it was funny that they were singing it at a black man?
Yeah, well, I guess one question I have asked in this time of learning is, if the people that started singing it then in the time of Chris Oates and Martin, if they knew then what we know now and we're talking about, would they have found it appropriate to start singing it because there's a black player on the pitch? That's quite a tough question to ask, but I think that I would like to think that a lot of people wouldn't. And that leads on to where we are now. Okay, so if you knew then what we know now, is it still appropriate? Like Martin says, it was about Chariots of Fire and, invigorated him and it lifted him. Nobody knew or had a real awareness of its origins and its attachment to slavery then. So if they did, I don't think, well, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but if that was the case then and they started singing it, would he have taken it the same way? So that's the question we're asking now. Now we know more. Now we're a bit more educated about it and we're having the conversation. Is it still appropriate? That's the discussion the RFU have to have.
Will, earlier you mentioned the Colston statue pulled down in Bristol and chucked into the quay. And, Churchill's statue vandalised. What's the difference between a statue and a song?
For what I'm led to believe, the Colston statue has been recovered from the quay and will be going into a museum, and there'll be a far more rounded discussion about someone who had been celebrated as a great philanthropist to understand where, through the transportation of 90,000 slaves under his company, of which I think 15 to 20,000 died on the passing across the Atlantic. That education side is a discussion that my wife and I have been having about how was I not taught this in school? How was I not taught about the colonial past and all the colonial past, not just the spoils of victory and the sun will never set and rule Britannia, and actually to understand England's role in what took place starting in the late 16th century. So a statue can be put in a museum and used educationally. A song can be retired, having understood we're now viewing it through a different lens. A song can be parked and not sung again, and people can talk about it. I think it's a massive opportunity for these discussions that clearly are highlighted by a song that Twickenham has sung for a long time to enable us all to just discuss a little bit more about our past and understand we cannot erase our past, but we must acknowledge it in a balanced way, which clearly has not taken place.
Topsy, Will makes a good point there. I was watching the Sky News programme, Is Change Gonna Come? And they had a historian on there, and he was talking about the fact that Black history is just ignored in this country, and the history of this country is portrayed as if this country, everything we did was perfect. Would that be the difference then, starting from the kids playing mini rugby to the young ones at school, to say, this is real Black history, and then by the time they got to be in the stands at Twickenham, they wouldn't be singing about slaves?
Yeah, I think that education right at kind of kids level is where you need to start. Some of the things, again, I'm talking about my experiences, some of the things I've learned in the last 3 weeks, all fresh and new to me. Things that I think I should have known this earlier, either been taught it or maybe should have gone about it myself and educated myself a bit more. But knowing that now, you think that it almost has been a bit of a hidden history and we don't talk about it enough. And now we're trying to, of course, with any sort of change, there is a lot of opposition. But actually, I think embracing it and understanding it more actually will lead to better progression. It will mean we can make better decisions. And then if we talk about the grand picture around equality and injustice, we can actually move forward in that. I know we're talking about the song and that, but I don't want that to get lost in the bigger picture. And like Will says, ultimately we're talking about a song that can be parked as easily as it can be brought back. but there is a bigger picture, which is an ongoing conversation that we need to keep having.
Indeed. I hate to bring money into this, Maggie, but you're in the corridors of power at the RFU. It won't be cheap for them to change. I mean, they use a lot of branding around this song. Do you think that will have an impact on sort of decisions that they come up with?
I don't think it will. Look, the COVID-19 pandemic is actually going to affect many sporting organisations, the sporting landscape. The RFU will be hit hard generally just because we've had games cancelled and rescheduled. So money isn't going to be great for any sporting organisation. But I also know with the RFU, perception is important. We want to make sure that our game is perceived to be inclusive. And I think the best way of doing that, communicating in a way to our members that we're on your side. We want to ensure that we are going forward, that makes our sport open to all. So, look, I'm not saying that the RFU have loads of money to splash around, but what I am fully aware is that the RFU will want to make sure that we as a sport are perceived to be a sport that's inclusive.
And Maggie, are you on this review?
Beyond, sorry, I was just going to say very quickly, I think things go beyond money in this instant, that absolutely, that of course you need to fund all these discussion organisations, but you can't implicitly be spending money on something that is causing offence. And I think that funding, if it were to be found to be causing offence, would immediately be stopped.
Yeah, that's interesting. So Maggie, are you on this review?
I am not, no. Look, I only found out about the breaking news about the RFU doing this review as of yesterday with everyone else. So I imagine there'll probably be further conversations with regards to it and maybe my involvement. But right now, I am not on the review.
Okay, so does that mean it's a review made up of white middle-aged men?
I cannot tell you that, as I am unaware. If I had further information, I would let you know, but I imagine the RFU have said they're going to conduct a review and then source the relevant people to be part of that. Okay.
And actually, what's really interesting there, and again, it's difficult, and I hope I get the words right here. So the immediate assumption is white middle-aged men will not give it a fair hearing. Immediately that assumption has been taken. And you're absolutely right to say that, and that's what we have to try and change. That the assumption that a white middle-aged man will be structurally, institutionally racist because he is white and middle-aged. And that goes back to, we're talking about the song, but park the song or deal with the song. But the bigger picture is a place where a review can take place with a collective of people who are fair-minded and balanced.
Exactly, and people who've lived it, Will. If people talk about white privilege, and what that means in simple terms is just that life has tilted in their favour. Now, if you have a review of people who, because life is tilted that way, don't understand other problems, they're not going to get this, are they? And that's what I don't know what you think, Topsy, but that will be my problem if it's not representative. The group of people who are deciding on how to go forward at the RFU.
Yeah, and this is the bigger point of the whole review around how the RFU and how English rugby operates. We're talking about inclusivity. We're talking about looking at the England team now. I know Maggie said not the women's; they're not at that level, but in terms of being representative, getting that 30%. If we want to sustain that throughout the game, the men's, the women's, the youth, the 20s, 18s, everyone, what picture do we need to set at the top of the tree? And it's probably not the one that's there now. So to get to that point, things like this are a great example. Okay, we're doing a review into the history of this song, which has slave connections. Okay, what sort of board do we want? What sort of faces and people do we want to see on that board to show that we are actually meaning what we say? We've said we're going to be more diverse, we're going to be more inclusive. Okay, this is the first instance to show that. And then it means a real commitment. It's not just words anymore. It's what actively going about this, making sure that if there'll be kids, watching the news, and they'll be asking their parents, oh, we've been to Twickenham, we sang Swing Low. Is this what it really means? And they'll be having that discussion, and it will open their eyes and, I guess, get them thinking about, oh, okay, if I'm aspiring to be an England international and I'm a black player, do I want people then singing that song? Am I going to be offended by it? So we're starting to learn a lot, and I think it's really good. But going back to the point, I think we need to now show a real active commitment towards being more diverse, and this could be the very first example of doing that.
I mean, Topsy mentioned there, it starts, at junior levels with education. Maggie, you're right at the top of the game and the top of the organisation. Surely it's got to happen there as well, and it's got to start there. And I don't know, people push back about positive discrimination or, as I say, white privilege. How do you change things at the top and do it quickly?
So for me, it's a two-pronged approach almost. You've got the top down and you've got the bottom up. So I believe that we need to change the top quite quickly to almost show that there is visibility at the top, and that we are trying to show genuine need to want to be diverse. But then again, I think there's a lot of work at the grassroots level. One, for participation, like we want to keep opening up those opportunities for more people from diverse backgrounds to come into our sport. And the RFU are doing that. Look, they have Project Rugby, which is a program that goes into inner cities to try and get more people into our sport. Same with the All Schools rugby program as well. So there are programs out there, but there's more that we need to keep doing at the grassroots level to open up that talent pool. But then I think there's also work that we need to do at the grassroots level to open up that leadership pipeline. Because the way you get to council and the way you get to the board is really starting at local clubs, and then getting on your constituent body committee. And that's a difficult pathway if you have never accessed it before. And the only reason why I got onto the RFU Council was because our president at the time in 2015 was Jason Leonard. And he said opportunities come up as a national member and we would love you to be on that council. So that's how I made the opportunity to get into that position. And now I'm visible and now you can hear my voice. But I would never have probably come through the club pathway, and that's where the issue is. We need to open up our pipeline, our leadership pipeline, and create other access points for people to get into the sport. Otherwise, what will happen is I think our diversity will continue to get more narrow if we don't find other ways of getting people in.
Will, for you, how do we change at board level, right at the top of the game? I mean, because we're effectively asking the turkeys to vote for Christmas, aren't we?
Yeah, I'm genuinely, this is the area that concerns me most, without going into discussions about other topics about where they've had to try and create change and facilitate change for funding issues, and it has just been stamped out and unable to be voted through. That is going to need a very strong and powerful voice from Maggie and within there, and to be supported and to be made sure it's heard. And a great deal of, I think where we might start, without necessarily being prepared for that question, is a great deal of transparency. What's being said? Are we annotating? Are we writing this down? Are we opening up the debate that we understand the decisions have to be made, and the council are in charge of the decisions, but are they being held accountable for those decisions? We have to understand in this transparent world, why are decisions being made? And if people understand that every decision is being reviewed, I would hope that would facilitate change faster. But I think you've hit the nail on the head, and the turkeys voted for Christmas is the perfect analogy. It needs root change, because historically, whatever the council will say and protest, historically, they have not been a fast-moving organisation, and the world is now moving very fast, especially on this topic.
just to finish up then, I'm going to ask you all the same question. Topsy, is change going to come?
Yes, it will. It might take time, but I think we've hit a watershed moment now where it is full steam ahead. I think the time to stay silent is gone now. I think people are encouraged by more people speaking up, and the voice that maybe for so long has fallen on deaf ears, or they've not wanted to say anything to be seen as disruptive or to be causing trouble. Actually, no, you're not alone on this now. There is enough of us, and we've got allies to really want to make positive change. So I hope and I pray that it is coming. Yes.
Will?
Yes, I believe so. I was brought up understanding that none of us is as good as all of us, and rugby. The start realization that rugby's going to hurt, but together you can get through that pain. But historically, we've been getting through that pain with a very small cross section of the demographics. I think that whole togetherness and that whole difference now will most certainly. I hope. It's foolish of me to say most certain, because perhaps we've had false dawns before. I hope this will be a real point of change.
And Maggie, last word to you.
Yes, I do believe it will change. To echo both the words that Will and Topsy have already said, for me, it's about coming together. So I need to be quite clear. It's not a black versus white thing. It's not us versus them. The only way we're going to create change is if we all do this together. We all have a part to play. And it's not just our sport that's been reviewed. The government are looking to make changes as well with regards to the sports governance code. And other sports are looking to review their governance as well. But what I hope is that rugby are the ones who are leading the way for other sports to follow. And I think what's great is that having these conversations are encouraging us to want to be part of this change. And that's the main thing.
Maggie Alphonsi, Topsy Ojo, Will Greenwood, a great pleasure to speak to you all. Fascinating to listen to your views. And you can't get rid of Will Greenwood, because coming up on his podcast on Monday, he's got Bill Sweeney on there as well. So that will definitely be worth a listen to. Thank you very much for joining us on the Rugby Union Show. Thanks all.